Okay, so this is the story of how I locked myself in my bathroom in my apartment in Spain. So, for those of you who don't know, my name is Kirsten. I've been living in Spain for 6 years. I live in a small town in the region of Andalusia, and I wanted to share this rather embarrassing story about how I locked myself in my apartment bathroom, my one bedroom apartment bathroom, and also talk about what you can do to prepare for emergencies or avoid emergencies if you are someone that is planning to move abroad. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Kirsten. I think I said that before, but I've been living abroad for 8 years and I'm currently based in Spain. And on my channel, I like to share with you what it's like living abroad, and share different aspects of Spain life, the authentic side of living abroad. And I also like to talk about, as a freelance writer, a freelance travel writer, and a freelance personal finance writer, I like to talk about money management, and specifically for people that are wanting to move abroad but haven't gotten their finances together, this is the place to be. So, back to how I got myself locked into my bathroom. So, if before I get into the story, I want to say that I also wrote about the story in my Substack. So if you want to read the story or you just like getting information through written content, you can check out the link in my description. So at the time, I was living in a small town called Jaén. I'm currently living in an even smaller town outside of Jaén. But in the time that I got locked into my bathroom, I had this cute little one bedroom apartment and it was on the ground floor. And I had this bathroom door that was, a little bit, what is it? You had a kind of one of those doors where you kind of had to push and pull to open at the same time. And so it would give me a little bit of trouble now and then, but it was nothing too serious. And so one day I went to take a shower. And normally I like to listen to music when I shower, as most people do. So I bring my phone into the bathroom with my little speaker. But I was in a rush that day, and sometimes, with the music going, I have my own personal concert in the shower, and it can take a little bit longer. But on this day, I was in a rush, so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go in, take a quick shower, get out and go about my business. So I jump in the shower, take a scalding hot shower, as most women do, and I, dry off, go to open the door, and it doesn't open. And I was like, oh yeah, of course, I have to push and pull. So I pushed on the door, turned the handle, and normally it opens right away. But this time it didn't. Thought it was weird. So I was like, let me push even harder, turn the handle, nothing. The door would move, but it didn't open. It would kind of like shake, but it wouldn't open. And then I started to feel like my skin kind of felt like it was heating. My stomach turned into knots, and I just started frantically pulling on the door and pushing and pulling. And then I realized that the door was not going to open no matter how hard I pulled or tugged. And I remember like falling to the ground and just kind of panicking of like, how did this happen? Is this real? Am I dreaming? Um, am I going to be stuck here for the rest of my life? How am I going to get out? Will I die here? Like worst case scenario was happening. And so I just, after a moment of freaking out, I just decided, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get out of here. One way or the other, I'm going to get out of here. So I started just kind of messing with the door handle. I was pulling out combs and like old toothbrushes and just trying to like see what I can do to to like open the door handle. I took off some screws off the door handle, but nothing. So after, I don't even know how much time had passed of me just trying to ricochet my way out of the bathroom, nothing was working. So fortunately, where I was living has very thin walls. And 99% of the time when I was living there, I absolutely hated those thin walls because why can I, this moment in time, I was super thankful to have thin walls because I could hear my neighbor coming into the apartment and leaving the apartment. And so, because I was hearing people coming in and out, what did I do? I just started screaming. I literally started screaming, and keep in mind, I live in Spain, and everyone, the native language is Spanish. So, of course, not only am I screaming, but I'm screaming in Spanish, which probably sounds ridiculous, probably sounded psychotic, crazy, screaming in Spanish, but I was like, ayúdame, ayúdame, help me. Um, and fortunately, my neighbor at the time heard me and she rang the doorbell. And luckily, the door is here, the front door of my apartment is here, and there's like a little hallway and then the bathroom door. So luckily, I was able to shout through the bathroom door and she could hear me through the front door. And she asked me if I was okay, and I was like, no, I'm not okay. I am trapped. Um, I am trapped in my bathroom, and so she's like, "Oh, do you want me to call the locksmith? Do you want me to call the locksmith? Do you want me to call the police?" I don't remember agreeing to her calling the police, but I definitely was like, "Yes, please call the locksmith." So you would think that, the end of the story ends there and happy ending. The locksmith came and freed me, but not quite. So thankfully, my neighbor called the locksmith, and I think they called the police too. I don't know why, but whatever. But when the locksmith got there, he had to come through my front door. When the locksmith got there, he had to come through my front door, which was locked because I was inside. And this wouldn't have been a big of a problem if I didn't make this error. The error was I left my keys in the door after I locked it. Instead of taking the keys out, I left the keys in the lock because it was just easier for me, and I kind of figured, well, um, it's easier and I don't have to look for them when it's time to leave. That was a mistake because normally if the door was just locked and the keys weren't in the lock, the locksmith could have easily opened the door. But instead, they had to drill and take off the lock and then use, I think, like a hammer or something to knock my keys out of the socket in order for them to enter the door. So that took probably, again, I had no sense of time because I did have my phone on me at the time. And so I had no idea how much time was passing, but I could hear them drilling, and I was just like standing there in my bathrobe, just hoping that they would get to me soon. Luckily, they did, and once they got through the front door, it was pretty easy to get through the bathroom door. And when I opened the bathroom door, I was greeted by the locksmith, two police officers, and my neighbor. And I was there. Luckily, I had a bathrobe, so I wasn't like completely naked or anything like that. And I was just so thankful. It was such an experience and such a feeling of like relief, but also embarrassment because I had like, four strangers in my apartment and I was in a bathrobe. Um, so that was fun. And luckily, the locksmith was like, hey, it's just, FYI, like take your keys out of the socket. next time. And the police officers were really friendly, and they made sure I was okay, and things like that. So yeah, if my neighbor hadn't heard me, luckily my boyfriend was coming over later that night for us to go to a dance class. So eventually, um, he would have found me and called a locksmith and got me out, but that would have happened like hours later, because he wasn't coming over later that night. So, anyways, here are some tips if you're planning to move abroad solo, like I did. Here are some tips to kind of keep you safe and hopefully you don't get locked into your bathroom. So, safety tip number one is always maintain contact with someone, where you live, in your area, and people back home. I like to have a system with my family where we call each other every week. It would be better. It'd be better if you can to do something like every Monday, every Tuesday, every Thursday, have a call or have a check in with people back home, because then it just gives people lets people know, that you're okay. I think having, frequent contact, obviously depending on how far away you are from home, obviously depending on how far away you are from your home country, from your friends or your relatives, they may or may not be able to get to you quickly, but um, at least you have some type of system that would communicate to people back home if something is wrong, if you don't, hear they don't hear from you in a while. Number two is get to know the people in your community, get to know your neighbors. You know, don't be afraid, get to know people, whether it's your neighbors, whether it's the person at the grocery store, and things like that. Getting to know people in your community is definitely can be a lifesaver, not even just if there's an emergency, but just to know where to buy the best products, or if something happens, if the water is shut off in your community for a moment, if there are events happening. It's just really, really important to talk to people and get to know people. The third thing is to know the emergency numbers. And yeah, know the emergency numbers, know, who to contact, know how to contact the police. If you're moving to a country where you don't speak the native language, make sure that you have some, emergency phrases of like, I need help, this is my problem. If you have, certain dietary limits or certain medical needs, make sure you have that written down, and have that translated so that at any moment, if there's an emergency, you can communicate your needs to whatever person, officer, medical doctor, etc. Number three, keep your phone on you. I know that, I always definitely am someone to say, hey, like, detach from your phone, live life, don't live life through your phone. But keeping your phone on you in certain moments can be really helpful. Um, and yes, and yes. Number four, maybe don't close the door. If you're living by yourself, don't close the door completely while you shower. I was asked this by the police officer when I was freed from my bathroom. They're like, if you live alone, why did you close the shower door? I'm like, it's winter. I'm conserving heat, obviously. Um, but I think with that being said, if you are living alone and something's not really working correctly, like, don't wait to get it fixed. I really, when the door was giving me trouble, when I first kind of moved in, instead of just like saying like, oh, I just have to push and pull and it'll be fine, I really should have talked to my landlord and had her get that fixed. Even though at the time it wasn't really a big problem, and obviously it was a bigger problem, you know, in the end. So, don't be afraid. I know sometimes we're in a new country and we might be intimidated to ask for help or say certain things, but if something is off, if something is not right, don't be afraid to speak up about it. Well, I hope you enjoyed my story and some lessons that I learned the hard way, and hopefully if you are moving abroad or even just traveling, hopefully some of the tips that I shared and my story that I shared will help you to avoid some scary, embarrassing, or just very awkward or uncomfortable moments. And if you want more stories and lessons about living abroad, particularly living in Spain, then make sure you give me a follow. Ciao for now.